Hello and welcome to another episode of the CompileSwift podcast. I'm your host, Peter Whittam. In this podcast, we talk about everything related to Apple platforms and Apple development, including macOS, iOS, iPadOS, watchOS, tvOS, and any other OS they've invented this week. So with that, let's get on with the show. How's it going, everybody? So this week, I spent some more time working with my macOS application, and what I wanted to do was something that I thought would be straightforward and simple, and ended up being a blog post because I was a little surprised how annoying it was to work with. At least the implementation that I came up with doesn't feel clean. So I'll put a link in the show notes. But basically what I wanted to do was I switch between two different views, two different tabs in the application. And so up on the menu, there's a check mark next to the view, right? So when you select the opposing view, of course, on the menu, I want the check mark to appear next to the new view that you've selected and disappear from the other one. So I thought to myself, well, this has got to be pretty straightforward and pretty simple. Well, it turned out to be a little more involved than I thought. And like I say, I'm not completely convinced that my implementation is correct. But what I did was basically I added an outlet, right, an IB outlet to my app delegate and hooked up my menu to it for the application. And then over in my view controller where I have the function, so that basically what I did was, I then hooked up each of the menu selections to the function in the view controller, if that makes sense. Again, it's all in the blog post. I'll put a link. But basically at that point, it was easy to switch off or to toggle the state of the view that you were selecting, right? So let's say that view number 1, had a check mark next to it, and view number 2 is now the one you selected. Well, it's easy to put the check mark next to that because you can just refer to the sender, right? So you would just do something like, sender.state equals, nscontrol.stateValue.on or something like that, right? So that's straightforward. The one that you clicked is very easy to toggle, and you'll see that in the code sample that I put in. But the problem began when I wanted to turn off the other one, right? So now you've gone to view number 2, and I want to turn off the check mark next to number 1. And I thought to myself, well, this, what I'm doing here doesn't seem right, but it works. So I have a couple of different ways that I've put in my blog post to show how I've done it. Basically, what I've done is sort of used, an index selection of the arrays, right? So in this case, it's in the view switching is in the file menu. So it's the second item in the array. So with the array being 0 index, that would be 1, right? So, I've just basically got items 1, as an array selection. And then, I tell it, okay, and then the submenu, where if I want to use items 0 or item 0 or item 1, I just pick whichever one I want again as an array index, and then toggle its state or turn it off. And I thought, well, this just seems so contrived, but it works, And then I thought, well, okay, what about if I use say like tags, something like that. So I put a tag on the submenu item that I wanted to do, and sure enough, that works, right? So, in the example I'm talking about here, you would say, submenu dot item, and then, with tag, whatever your tag may be, 100 in my case. So that works. But again, it just didn't feel completely satisfactory. But it's all in a blog post, so that if anyone else is looking out there to do this, it took me a while to find a way to make this work. So it's nice that I finally resolved it. But there's a link in the show notes for the post. It's up on CompileSwift.com. Or if you want, you can just go to CompileSwift.com/journal /2020-02-16. And you'll see it right there. It's called Changing macOS Menu Item States with Swift. So anyway, that was my fun this week with playing around with some menu stuff in Swift. We will take a quick break and we will be right back.
time for a break.
Let's talk about Spotify for a second. I've been a long time, many-year user of Spotify Premium, but there's also a free version you can use, so it won't cost you anything. And one of the things that I love about Spotify is I can combine all of my music from the massive library that they have, along with all of the podcasts that I listen to. And you obviously like podcasts because you're listening to this one. So on Spotify, you can follow your favorite podcasts to make sure that you never miss an episode. They're just delivered right to you. And it's also super easy to share with other people. I'm always sharing on Instagram and all the other social networks on my devices, things that I listen to on Spotify. So go ahead and download the Spotify app today and search for the CompileSwift podcast. It's in there along with all the other podcasts you like to listen to, I'm sure. So go ahead and download the Spotify app today.
Break time over.
Something else that I wanted to talk about this week was people testing their apps before they send them out to the world for other people to use. It's always amazing to me when I'm talking to developers, and these are developers of all varying levels, right? Some new developers to some very experienced developers. And I always find it amazing when I discover that they haven't really tested their own app. They just assume that everything's going to be okay. Point in case would be something as simple as, they say that, this app is checked to support, let's say iPads, for example, tablets. And maybe it's checked to support landscape mode. And they never really bothered to go back and look and see how it looked. Now, scaling up on the iPad is not great, but it's not the worst experience in the world. But you would think that if someone, checks the box to say support landscape mode, that they would actually go back and check it. And it's always amazing to me how many developers don't. Whenever I'm working on something, I will sit and spin that device in my hand to all orientations just to make sure that the experience is one that's going to be at least usable by a customer. And if it's not, then I'll try and fix that. And, again, it won't be necessarily the best looking, but at least it'll be usable. But I'm not going to name any names on any apps, but, I have some apps that I love to use by, well-known developers. And it amazes me that they never stopped to really think or look at landscape mode, because I'd like to believe that some of the problems that I find with some apps, they didn't check it. Because if they checked it and thought it was acceptable, then, that's a whole different kettle of fish, as we say in England. It's just, that would be just unforgivable, I think, if you looked at something and it was horrible and you just were like, I don't care, it's fine. So it's a bit of a plea to developers to check those orientations, right? Or to quote one of my favorite films, check those corners. Just make sure that everything's okay before you send it out to the world, because you don't want to be getting bad reviews because you didn't take a few minutes to just check those devices and check those orientations. So check those corners and, give everybody a happy experience. That's it for this week. It's a bit of a brief one this week, and I will catch you in the next episode.